up and down. Ça, c'est le micro.
if I can get everyone to please take their seats, please. Si tout le monde peut prendre vos sièges. On va commencer dans 2 secondes. We're about to get started, so if everyone can please take their seats.
On y va. Je suis un peu loin, je suis courte. Oui, je me disais la même chose. Bonjour.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here, honorable ministers and feminist activists and all the representatives of civil societies who have mobilized in order to participate at the 62nd Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations. It's an honor to be with you here today. My name is Anne Delorme. I coordinate the ACOSI, the Quebec Association of International Cooperation Organizations. It's an organization that has 60 members and that promotes a feminist vision of international solidarity. Many of our members are present here today from Quebec. It's Carrefour International and SUCO. I'm also representative for the Americas in the Francophone Network for Gender Equality. which is part of the International Organization for the Francophonie. So the theme of this year has to do with the empowerment of rural women and girls, and we propose a feminist approach. What does this feminist approach consist of? Basically, it means making sure that women are at the heart of development and at the decisions concerning their communities and their countries. We need to value their skills and their expertise and their contributions to the peace processes, to their resilience to climate change, to food security, and to good governance. But above all, a feminist approach is a question of rights. The rights of rural workers, women rural workers, but particularly in agriculture, the right to make collective decisions, and also so that they can have access and control of land and the means of production and financial resources. It's the right of women to live without violence, because no empowerment is possible as long as domestic and workplace violence continues. Reproductive and sexual rights of women, and particularly young women, the only way to achieve gender equality. We cannot advance without the transformation of the power relationships of our societies. It's essential work over the long term, and that concerns all of us. And feminist movements are at the heart of this movement. And often organizations to defend women's rights are particularly underfunded, and particularly in rural areas. And we need to promote women's rights in order to influence governments at every levels. Governments have an important role to play in establishing the rule of law and creating policies nationally, and also meeting their national commitments. Financial resources are also vital. Governments can reduce structural obstacles that women face in order to realize their full economic and social potential. We are fortunate to have major allies, including Canada, which adopted a new feminist international aid policy in 2007, and has also contributed hundreds of millions of dollars to these international feminist aid organizations. We're very proud of Canada's work, and now I'd like to invite the Honorable Marianne Monsef, Minister of Women's Status in Canada, to take the floor.
In this room with incredible women from my own, but also from various communities from around the world, to talk about a group of women and girls in our communities who actually don't fall into just one category. I am the Minister for Status of Women, and it's a privilege to lead the Canadian delegation. Where are the Canadians in this room? What? All the Canadians have come to the Canadian session? I do hope we take this opportunity to learn from our Canadian allies and to support one another, yes, but also to exchange promising and best practices with others. It's a privilege to be a Canadian, and I hope all of you feel that. As Minister, though, I also wear the Member of Parliament for Peterborough-Kawartha. It's in the province of Ontario, and Peterborough-Kawartha is a mixed rural urban riding with a First Nation reserve as part of its boundaries. That means that I live in a city with a population of about 80,000, and about 10-15 minutes outside the city's boundaries, we have townships who have different realities. And then about 20 minutes north of Peterborough, Curve Lake First Nation is one of the communities in Canada that still has yet to access clean water. But The reason I tell you this is because each of the women here has been working to advocate for a group of people who make up 1 in 5 Canadian women. This particular panel that we have today each bring a great deal of advocacy and effort to the issues that women in rural and remote communities in Canada experience, because the majority of the seats of power and privilege in our parliament, for example, are filled by individuals who represent urban ridings. So those of us who represent rural communities, who make up about 20% of the seats, have to be that much more effective and that much louder in our advocacy. We have to be creative in the solutions that we present. We have to be fierce and tenacious. And we have to recognize that when we work together, we're more likely to achieve shared outcomes. Highlight the diversity of rurality here, because we know that living in certain parts of Canada, indeed different parts of the world, mean different things for different people. Canada is applying an intersectional gendered lens to all its policies, thanks to Prime Minister Trudeau. It's an effort that requires rigor, it requires good data, and it requires ongoing monitoring. That intersectional gendered lens that the Prime Minister has asked us to apply to every decision, and indeed to the new budget requests that ministers have to make, takes into account the fact that when we make a decision, it affects women and men and gender non-binary individuals differently. But it'll mean different things for people living in rural versus urban communities, for Indigenous and immigrant people, for young people versus seniors, for those with disabilities and exceptionalities, and those who don't speak any of the official languages in our beautiful country. This gendered lens allows us to be more inclusive in our outcomes. But we also know that for Indigenous women and girls living in rural and remote communities across Canada, the opportunities and the challenges are in different ways. Leading up to this gathering, I brought together rural women and girls in my community to help inform me, as someone who lives in an urban part of the riding, about what message they wanted me to bring to the United Nations on their behalf. And what I heard in that conversation were a list of challenges, including, rural broadband. We need access to the internet, infrastructure. There is a lack of privacy for accessing services for challenges like gender-based violence. There's a stigma associated with it. Everybody knows everybody. And if you walk into a women's shelter, people know why you're going there. They talked about the stereotypes of the farmer's wife. She's not just the farmer's wife. She's doing all the work that a farmer is doing. She too is a farmer. But the most important piece that I left that room with was, for all the challenges that have to be addressed, we have to recognize that women and girls, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, in rural and remote parts of Canada have shaped Canada, have built this beautiful, incredibly prosperous country that is not yet totally equal, but they have built it. It's an important part of our identity. And if we're going to focus on challenges, we have to recognize the strength, the courage, and the resilience. They reminded me of Chief Elsie Knott, the first Indigenous woman elected chief of a First Nation council, came from Curve Lake First Nation in my community. So for all the ways that we're going to raise awareness about the challenges that women and girls experience in the rural and remote parts of our communities, we have to remember their strength and their contributions. I know that the women on this panel are going to be sharing their wisdom and their unique experiences with us. All of us have been shaped by a powerful movement of global feminists who have brought us to this moment in time when the Prime Minister of Canada, President of France, the head of the United Nations proudly proclaim to be feminists. That is thanks to women in this room now and all the women who have come before us. We are at a very important moment in time. Accelerated change is possible. but together and ensure that the voices of those women and gender non-conforming people in the shadows are heard. Last, can I ask those of you who live in a rural or remote community to rise and be recognized? That looks like about less than 20% of the people in the... I hope that when you're talking to someone who represents such a community, that you spend 3-4 times more time with them than someone with whom you have more similar experiences with. Miigwech, tashakor, merci, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this conversation.
J'aimerais
Now, I would like to invite the Honorable Hélène David, Minister responsible for the status of women of the Governor of Quebec, to take the floor. Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in the official language of Quebec, which is French, and you'll have simultaneous interpretation. Thank you very much. Thank you for having invited me to participate here at this wonderful panel, which is going to talk, that is to say, solidarity with other countries when we come from a country that's as privileged, or the province of Quebec, privileged, but also in a vulnerable situation for many women.
D'assister hier à un panel, certaines d'entre vous étaient probablement là, présidé par la secrétaire générale de l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie, une Québécoise, canadienne, Madame Michaëlle Jean.
Francophonie was there, and it was a very good introduction, and it was followed by a very shocking interventions by incredible women, and I would like to refer to the one from Mali, but that's not the only one. And I would like to say, to repeat what I said yesterday, that we were feeling very noble in Quebec regarding the various and enormous challenges in the world. We're talking of empowerment and a lot of that in the countries of the North, but what is happening in the other countries, collaboration, and I think that we'll be able to discuss about all these things, and in Quebec, we had a lot of progression in the last 40 years, 50 years, and in 90 was the first vote for women, and then a lot of social programs were put in implementation. For example, the ones regarding the salary, the equity in salary, and unfortunately, a lot of countries don't have not that, and also programs regarding family vacation. Parenthood vacation, and also that's not what all the women can have, and or to have access to prenatal healthcare or access to education like we have in Quebec, or it's not all the countries that can have benefit from the salary equity, and a lot of them women in the world are still victims of sexual aggression, and in a very privileged zone, but also in our own society, our own community, we feel accountable in order to help the vulnerable women. And Miriam was also referring and urban zones, but also women who come from immigrations and refugees, and also women who come from intersection, who have different needs, various needs. And also we know that the victims of sexual aggression and people who need to have a house are really in bad situation because they need to have a place to stay, and but it mustn't be the only economy of our international solidarity, but also we have to also address the countries that are facing very big vulnerability. So I would like to um, launch a very interesting and precise discussion. And also, as women, we all try in endeavor in our community to make sure that such an appointment today is a very significant one, even more important than ever, because troubled situations and following in this fourth feminist revolution that was celebrated in March. We have to keep building construction so that to make women more involved in solidarity and all the programs that we want to address to issues in the world. And I thank you very much for listening to us and participating today. Thank you, Mrs. David. And so we're going to start with the themes of our panel. There is a feminine situation. We're talking about the climate change and also the economic condition of women, and regarding women facing violence. And I would like to invite Gagnon, who is the director general of SUCO. I will speak very slowly in order to facilitate the translation, and I would like to break the ice for the panel. But since I'm talking about the climate change, I was saying I would like to start with the water, because we might be, as we with the feet in water. So I represent an organization of Canadian cooperation. We mostly work in a rural zone and area, and so climate change are very important, and that is very important